From the studios of the Optimism Institute, welcome to the Blue Sky Podcast. I'm your host, Bill Burke, and in every Blue Sky episode, we'll be speaking to leaders, researchers, and thinkers whose stories and insights will remind us that there is always blue sky above. Sometimes you just have to get your head above the clouds to see it. If you ask just about anyone, they'll tell you that the relentless pace and often negative content of today's news has them exhausted, at times confused, and often more than a little depressed. My guest today experienced these symptoms to an extreme degree and decided to make it her life's work to help us all navigate the wide array of outlets seeking our attention, understand the impact that news information is having on us, and develop healthier ways to stay informed while not becoming overwhelmed. Jodie Jackson is an expert on the psychological impact of the news on our mental health and the health of our society. Her widely cited research has led to regular speaking engagements at media and mental health conferences around the world. She's a partner at the Constructive Journalism Project and holds a master's degree in applied positive psychology from the University of East London. She's also the author of the 2019 book, You Are What You Read: Why Changing Your Media Diet Can Change the World. If you want to hear someone who really understands the nature of the news and its impact on all of us, I know you'll enjoy this Blue Sky conversation with Jodie Jackson as much as I did. Jodie Jackson, welcome to the Blue Sky Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's a real pleasure, and I'm excited for this conversation because your work is right in the bullseye of much of what we talk about here on Blue Sky and the Optimism Institute, and that's the psychological impact of our news consumption. How did you first get interested in this subject?
So for me, it kind of was born from necessity. So when I was in my early 20s, I had a bit of a breakdown. I was experiencing extreme levels of anxiety. I was having panic attacks, and it sort of made me begin to really worry. And what it was, where it was coming from, was my news, right? Because I had watched the news almost every day throughout my degree. And the thing is, it wasn't just one story about one terrible event that sort of shocked me into this state of kind of nervous system dysregulation. It was the constant, relentless drip of negativity that I was feeding my mind daily. And the way that I describe it is, if you think about in nature, you have those valleys, right? So you can think of the Grand Canyon, for example. Well, they don't happen because of one event. They happen because tiny drops of water wear away at the rock over time, and it creates those big, deep valleys. And that was exactly what was happening to my mental health. This negativity was just wearing away at me. And it was really affecting my psychology, right? And when you think about psychology in its simplest terms, it is the constant conscious and unconscious thoughts that we have about ourselves, about other people, and about the world around us. Now, when it comes to the news, and the reason I explain that is because it helps understand why the news has such a powerful impact on your psychology, because it affects how you think about the world, which made me feel like the world was terrible, about other people, that people were awful, and about myself, that I was powerless to affect any change. And amongst all of these huge, enormous problems that seemed to be reported on continuously. So it had an incredibly big impact on me. And at that time in my life, I felt like I needed to do something about it. And my solution, well, my initial solution, which is the same as a lot of people, is to switch off. But it didn't work. It made me feel slightly less bad, slightly less often, but it didn't make me feel significantly better. And so I decided to create a website called What a Good Week. And I actively, desperately went on search for stories of progress, of solutions, of people fixing the world, making it a better place. And I had such an incredibly profound shift in my psychology. You know, instead of fearing others, I developed a faith in others. Instead of feeling this deep level of anxiety, I started to feel optimism. And instead of feeling despair, I felt hope. It really transformed how I saw the world, how I saw myself and my potential within it. And I became obsessed with understanding, especially because this isn't just my problem. This is a
Yeah.
problem for a lot of people. I became obsessed with understanding that link between media and mental health, especially because one of the things I learned early on in my research is the news isn't a reflection of everything that goes on. It's a reflection of everything that goes wrong. So my disrupted psychology was based on
Hmm.
a story that wasn't even necessarily the true picture. And so I
Right.
thought, wow, what an incredible impact this can have on us. We should probably understand this a bit better.
That's now everyone listening knows why I had you on this show, because you are hitting on so many subjects, and I know that people listening are feeling a lot of the same things. And I bet if your experience is like mine, where I'm searching for these great stories to tell on my podcast, they're not hard to find. So one of the things I'd like to talk about is this negativity bias that's in the media and in our brains. And one of the reasons I mention it here is that there's no doubt that we're attracted to negativity, and the news media understands that. And I had a lovely conversation with a neuroscientist named Richie Davidson, and he said behind the negativity bias, they believe, or in his field, many believe that really what we are attracted to is difference. If something's different, it gets our attention. And his point is the negative things are the outliers. They're not the normal things. So it's a negativity bias that's grounded in this notion that can be reinforcing and reassuring to us that the negative stuff is the exception. Does that ring true to you?
It does. I mean, definitely. There's so much there that's true. Negativity bias is, a real thing that is baked into our biology, and it comes from waves of evolution and our survival instinct. And so that's one of the reasons why we pay attention to bad news. And media providers know this and they feed this. Negativity is 7 times more likely to get our attention than positivity.
Yep.
And their entire business model is built around engagement, right? So negativity will always prevail to a certain extent unless we interrupt that design for ourselves. Novelty absolutely is something as well the brain loves. And you're absolutely right. Negative events are the outliers. They are the things that are essentially novel. The problem is when they are repeated to the extent that they are in the media, or in the news, I should say specifically, they lose their novelty. Things that perhaps are extraordinary seem ordinary. And this is why we have a misperception of reality. This is why it distorts and clouds our judgment, because knowing that they are extraordinary doesn't actually, our brains don't work in logic, right?
No,
Our brains
right.
work on patterns and repetition and emotional intensity. They're the things that kind of condition our thoughts and our belief systems. So even if you know that these things are exceptional, if you see them every single day, you will not think that they're exceptional. And
Total
similarly,
sense. Yep.
even if you know that there is a negativity bias in the news, you know it is a distorted perception of reality. If you don't see any other story, it will form your basis of understanding. Knowing about the negativity bias doesn't protect you from it. What does protect you from it is activating a different story, including stories of solutions, of progress, of innovation, of peace, of hope, of all of those other things that I said, because with any bias, you can't necessarily beat it, but you balance it. And that is how you beat any bias, right? So, yes, our brains love negativity. Yes, our brains love novelty. But that kind of preference has been exploited so much,
Yep.
whereby A, it doesn't help us, and B, we don't consider them as extraordinary or negative. We just consider them ordinary, and we don't just accept them. We come to expect them. We would be surprised if we switched on the news and there wasn't something awful happening.
Exactly.
So our
Right.
brains just kind of acclimatize to the environment that we're in, and it becomes our normal. And so we, even though you can think we're pulling in these outliers and they exist on the fringes and they are the worst things that happen, if that's where you live
Yeah.
informationally, that's your reality.
Totally. Oh, and you put it so well. And another thing I think helps with perspective, in addition to seeking out positive stories and, as you describe, and others, solutions focused journalism instead of just the problems, what are people doing to solve them? I'm a big believer in putting things into context, historical context. And my favorite line, and if anyone has this on their bingo card, I bring it up almost every episode. But a gentleman named Kevin Kelly, you may have read, he was a founding editor of Wired magazine, and he's a true optimist and technophile, and everything's He's just a really thoughtful guy. But he has a line I love, which is, if you only read the news, you'll think things have never been worse. But if you read history, you'll realize things have never been better. And I think one of the things we struggle with is putting things in historical context. So I'm speaking to you from the United States, and it doesn't take much almost every day to hear someone say, this country's never been more divided than we are today. It's like, we did fight a 4-year civil war where we killed each other, right? Or, let's go back to those great times of, the 1950s. Okay, well, women were repressed and we had Jim Crow laws, and, we lose perspective. Is that something that you've studied or come across too, that people just feel like they're so focused on the present that they don't have a good sense for the progress we've made since the past?
I totally agree with you. I don't think it's their fault that they don't have that perspective, because we're not, like, the very nature of news is not history.
Yeah,
It's what is new, what is current, what is breaking, what is, and it's so fast paced. The speed at which information is now produced, especially in journalism, is just wild. Um, and so it doesn't look back to give you that picture. So
right,
I do favor a form of slow journalism, something that does take time to be able to put it into context of where it fits. But I think people are forgiven for thinking that the world is in such a terrible state right now, more so than it's ever been, simply because that's the information that they're given.
right.
And so, because our news environment isn't conducive to be able to create that context, to be able to create that history, to be able to help people understand the nuance and the progress that takes place. And this is the thing, right? I mentioned break when it comes to news. What's breaking
Yeah,
news? Breaking news.
yeah.
Problems break things, right?
Yes,
Solutions build, and they are slower time frames. It takes a
yes,
second to break something, it takes a decade to build something.
right.
So it's having that understanding as well, that these stories exist on different timelines. And so absolutely, if you look back at history, and this was one of the things that gave me so much hope, is that this really is one of the best times to be alive in human history. We are living in one of the most opportunistic, most readily available times in our history, yet that is not the narrative. That is
Right.
not the way that people think or feel. And it then clouds their judgment about how they make decisions, about who they vote for. It affects everything from what we care about to what we vote for, to what we legislate against. And it's on shaky ground because we've not got that context. We've not got that broader understanding of the bigger picture. We are being fueled by fear and a
Yes.
lot by hate and division. And that is created by the narrative through which we tell stories about the world and each other.
Once again, we have on Blue Sky a guest whose work was born from and inspired by personal experience. Jodie Jackson knows what it's like to have news consumption damage one's mental health, and now she's doing something about it. She's recognized that a constant stream of negative news is analogous to the Colorado River's carving of the Grand Canyon. The daily impacts might appear small, but over time they can become huge. Turning the news off and interrupting this steady stream can make a big difference, as can paying more attention to good news and the innumerable ways that people are doing positive things all over the world. Now, back to our conversation with Jodie Jackson. In your book, You Are What You Read, which I highly recommend, and I've talked to others who say, it's just like food. If you, like as you are, you eat. If you put bad food in your body, you don't feel good. If you put bad news in your body, as you said at the top, you don't feel good. It really affects your psychology. We've talked about the negativity bias, and you've spoken and written about a couple of other biases. One's the availability bias. Can you describe the availability bias and how that impacts what we're talking about?
Yeah, well, this kind of feeds back to one of the points I made earlier. What is available to you is what you will
Yeah,
base your beliefs on, right? So
right.
the more something is available to you, what was it that I don't know if Hitler did say this, but it was certainly attributed to him or one of the people within his party, that if you tell a lie big enough, loud enough, for long enough, people will begin to believe it, right? Well,
Exactly.
it's kind of like that.
Yes.
What you become familiar with, your brain likes familiarity. When we think about how our brains operate outside of logic, right? And that's where your
Yeah.
biases sit and your more subconscious thinking patterns that don't necessarily require as much logic. Your brain loves familiarity, anything it sees repeatedly. And that's
Yes.
why, for example, in my TED talk, I gave a few statistics. And something I do when I'm teaching kids is I say, what are you more likely to be killed by? It's
Oh
a
yeah.
great question. They love that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But sharks or coconuts falling from a tree? And they'll all say sharks. And then statistically, coconuts kill more people annually than
I
sharks.
I did
But
not
it's
know
what
that.
is available to you is going to form the basis of your opinions and your beliefs. And so
Right.
it's our job, when you know that what is available to you is steeped with negativity, with agenda, with engagement metrics, with all of these other things that aren't built for your interest, you then have the opportunity and the choice to say, what else should I make available to me? What
Right.
can I create to make more available so that I can be more resourceful in my state of mind?
Yeah. And one of the examples I like to use too is I used to work in the weather business, and people have a sense, no doubt the weather's changing, climate's changing, but they add everything to that. So they have trouble enjoying an unusually warm day in April because, oh, there's climate change, and it's like, well, if it's 5 degrees warmer today, that might have something to do with climate change. And another is, if you polled 100 people in the United States, where we have a lot of tornadoes in this country because of our topography and everything else, people think there are more tornadoes today than there were in the past. And they think that for two reasons. One, because they're associated with climate change, and actually tornadoes are probably not influenced by climate change. It's a whole other story. But the big reason they think that is we all have cameras in our pockets. And in the old days, you never had footage of tornadoes because they happen quickly, they're unpredictable, and no one had a big, camera to take out and shoot it. Now, people are driving down the road, they're stepping out on their apartment balcony, and they're taking footage of tornadoes. So what do we see? They're very dramatic, very scary, and they're very serious. But there aren't more of them today than there were in the past.
Yeah.
But
But the
people think
more
there
often you
are.
see something, the more common you believe it to be, right? So the media environment has changed enormously in the last 100 years. In the last 10 years, it's unrecognizable to what it was. And because of that change, we have access to so much information now, so much visual information as well as auditory and just all of it. We've got so much more information, and this accelerated pace of information combined with the undertone of negativity, which means we have way more access to negative and horrific things that are happening on a daily basis around the world. So we think they are happening more often, but they're
Exactly.
not. As we said, the story of humanity is one of progress. It's not actually one of failure. Yet the narrative is an accelerated failure because we've got more access,
Yep.
more channels, and it's changed so much. So the perception of reality and the statistics of reality kind of move in opposite directions.
It's maddening. I find it maddening. And this may relate to this next bias I want to talk about, confirmation bias. So if I understand it, if I'm obsessed with climate change, which I'm not saying we shouldn't be concerned about, we should, but if I'm obsessed with it, I'm looking for news that confirms my obsession. Is that one way to describe the confirmation bias?
Yeah, I mean, it's not necessarily even active pursuit confirmation bias. It's not as conscious as I believe this, so I need to validate this. It happens subconsciously, right? So if you believe something similar to, like, if I don't know, if you bought a new red car and
Yes.
suddenly you see them everywhere.
Yes.
Or that's like a really, really basic example, but your perception is dialed up, or like your
Yes.
your attention is dialed up to certain things. So when you've got confirmation bias, you might skim through an article or skim through social media, and most of it will go unnoticed in your mind. But say you do believe, you do have really, really strong opinions about climate change, and then you're scrolling through and something comes on to say, boom, this is really important, you need to know about climate change. You are going to naturally pay more attention to it. And then if you see an article that says climate change isn't real, it's a hoax, and by the way, I'm not saying it is. I,
Right.
I very much believe in climate change.
Yes.
However, if you say, like if there was something saying there's a hoax, it's not real, it's set up by the government, or whatever conspiracy theories go along with it, you're not going to
Right.
pay attention to that. That's just it's not in your realm of reality. And so you just discard it. It's not worth looking at and challenging yourself with. And similarly, vice versa. If you believe climate change is a hoax, then you're probably not going to read the articles that talk in detail about the way in which it's changing the environment. Yet that
Right.
article that says it is a hoax, it's all man-made by the government, blah, blah, blah. You're going to dive into that and say, I knew it. That's
Yeah.
exactly what I thought. And so it's not as conscious as saying, where do I need to find information? Because the information will find you. Long are the days where we search for information consciously. I mean, we do at times, but more often than not, information comes to us. And you will pay more attention. And not only that, but the algorithms now will strengthen your confirmation bias because they want you to stay engaged on the platforms.
Yep.
So they will give you more information that you're more likely to engage and agree with, and give you less of the stuff that's probably you're not going to click on, you're not going to scroll or swipe through or engage with. So there's this natural tendency. And this is the thing about media platforms, right? And I don't even call them media platforms anymore. I call them psychology platforms because they are built by psychologists, behavioral scientists, people who know how to hack our psychology and nudge our behavior. And so all of these things that are the natural tendencies within our brains that have been fine are now exploited and exaggerated by the algorithms, by media platforms, which means that our brains aren't always working in our favor. And I'm not saying that in a way that's this isn't necessarily to start a conversation about what media platforms need to do to be more helpful for society. I'm more interested in helping people understand how their brains work so they can serve themselves better.
Totally
And
agree.
be agents within their own life and be able to set themselves up for success. So knowing how media platforms work and how your brain works gives you so much more flexibility and choice to be able to understand how to use it to improve the quality of your life rather than use it unintentionally to potentially destroy or distract from the quality of your life.
Jodie Jackson emphasizes something here that is a cornerstone of the work we do at the Optimism Institute, when she says that the story of humanity is one of progress. This is absolutely true, and something too easily taken for granted or ignored when we focus on the less positive things that happen in the shorter term. She also points out an idea I hadn't thought of in quite these terms, that instead of our having to seek out the news the way we used to, today, the news finds us, and we need to be on our toes to fend this off when it starts doing us harm. Back to our conversation now with more on the subject of history. Back to history, and it's not ancient history. It's not that many years ago where if I'm reading a printed newspaper 15 years ago, the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or the Sun or whatever doesn't know what I'm reading. It has no feedback on what article I spent more time on, which section I skipped. I read the sports section, but not the horoscopes. They have no idea. Now they know, and they can respond to that. So if I click on the sports section, or I click on the horoscopes, or I click on the story about climate change, they know and they feed me more. That's one big difference. And a second, I'll speak for my country in the United States. We also have traditional news or cable news stations that line up politically. So there are more liberal ones, there are more conservative ones. So if I wake up in the morning slightly liberal or slightly conservative and I spend all day watching the conservative channel, I end the day farther to the right or farther to the left by what I've let come at me. Is that a fair way to describe it?
Yeah, definitely. I think you're always reinforcing. Your brain has a tendency to want to continuously reinforce its identity and its beliefs. So unless you unintentionally interrupt those beliefs and patterns, you just wire them in further. And so that's what I've kind of, a lot of my work now has moved beyond media education to, well, it's still a part of it, massive part of it, but I have now a program called Master Your Mind, the Master Your Mind Accelerator program, and it's for exactly that reason. We do, our subconscious is like the operating software of our minds. And along the way, through no fault of our own, through our experiences, through our information inputs, through anything that's happened to us or that we've repeated, we get ourselves in these patterns of thinking, right? Just like any software, you can pick up viruses, you can pick up glitches. So there is a way that you can reprogram that. And that was what it was incredible. Learning for sort of 10 years about media influence and about how it shapes and wires the way that we think, the way that we feel, the beliefs that we have, and our subconscious programming. That tapped me into a whole new field of science around neuroconditioning, of how we can do that for ourselves, how we can self-influence, how we can reprogram, how we can purposefully wire our brains to be able to work for us rather than against us. So it's been a really exciting kind of
I love it.
Journey through.
And your work has only gotten more important as time goes on. So, and I want to get to the practical advice, but as a bridge to that, and I know there are people listening, and probably everyone listening lives in a participatory democracy, presumably. And they're saying, but Jodi, I need to stay informed. I need to be an informed citizen. I can't just stop looking at the news. I need this. I need to be a good citizen. I have a sense for what your response would be. Respond to that. Because people are thinking that. I have to follow the news.
It's the first question that I get asked.
There you go.
So often when I talk about solutions, they're like, but we need to watch the news. I'm like, yeah, they're not. It's not necessarily mutually exclusive, right? People aren't creating solutions to problems that don't exist. So you are, it is a way of staying informed as a lens. There's a few things that I'd say to it, or to that statement, is we know that the negativity bias in the news creates a distorted perception of reality, right?
Yep.
So we understand that it is important to stay informed, and I totally respect that position. And a lot of people need to for their jobs or whatever else that they've got going on, or they just want to. However, there is a more effective way of staying informed and not psychologically burning yourself out in the process. Because you can absolutely watch the news. If you watch too much of it, though, just the more traditional news, negative news. And I'll share an example that helps demonstrate this.
Yeah.
So when the Boston bombings took place,
yes,
there was a study that was done that showed that people who watched the news of that event repeatedly had higher levels of post-traumatic stress disorder than people who were actually at the event.
Oh, wow.
Right now, why that happens is because I mentioned the way that our brains work is through repetition and emotional intensity, right? That's what conditions your mind.
Yes.
And when you're watching events like the Boston bombing on repeat, when you are repeatedly watching that, you're basically reactivating your fear response, your amygdala, that fear center in your brain. And every time you watch it, you're strengthening it deeper into your nervous system. And that's why they experienced high levels of post-traumatic stress than people who saw it once, even though they were at the event and it was probably more emotionally intense in that moment. They only experienced it once, not through repetition, right? So if you want to stay informed, even about some really terrible events, there is a difference between informing and indulging. So watch it once so that you know, and that's enough. That is enough to know. So that's the first thing that I would say. The second thing I would say is that when we are aware that it can create these negative emotional states like post-traumatic stress, pessimism, anxiety, contempt and hostility towards other people, all these other things that it can create. And we know how powerful it can be to balance it, right? Because it's fine that we feel anxious. It's fine that we feel stressed or frustrated. They're human responses to boundaries that have been crossed or injustices that we feel. They're perfectly fine and normal. What's not fine is that you only experience them, right? Because if you only experience them, that can lead to more damaging psychological states. And now everything in life that has energy, and we are energetic beings, requires opposites. So if you think about the North and South Pole, right?
Yes.
You have an energetic charge between them, and it's the opposites, it's the polarity that creates that energetic charge. Well, a plug as well, right? You've got the positive and the negative, and it creates that electrical current or allows it to flow through. We are the same. The human spirit is activated in the same way. If you have too much negativity, you become kind of paralyzed, right? You're discharged. If you have too much positivity, you become pacified. You're still sort of discharged. Whereas if you combine them, if you have things like outrage with optimism, anxiety with hope, or fear with hope, if you have frustration with agency, that's when you get charged. That's when you activate. That's when you actually can do something about the information that you're consuming. It's not just staying stuck and stored in your nervous system. It's
Yep.
activated in some way. So I would say, by all means, stay informed, but widen the picture. You don't need to say, I'm not going to look over here, I'm only going to look over here, but widen the lens. Give yourself a more complete picture, because not only will you become more accurately informed, you'll also create mental resilience that protects you from some of the more harmful side effects of the news. And you'll also have some kind of charge within you if there is something you want to do about it as well. So, from my point of view, absolutely stay informed. But we know that doom and gloom, constantly focusing on worst case scenario, everything that we know from growth mindset, from positive psychology, from peak performance, everything that we know about what activates the human spirit and causes us to be resilient, grow, build, and create, negativity and worst case scenario on their own does not produce the best results for anyone, not least of all society. And so, by all means, be informed, but be smart about the way that you inform yourself.
Fantastic. Yeah. And I think having that notion that there's something I can, in my small way or big way, do about it. I learned an expression recently that action absorbs anxiety. And, and it's,
100%.
and it's a nice way to
Absolutely.
think about it. And there's all these different definitions of optimism and hope and that sort of thing. I've sort of settled on, I believe in sort of an active form of optimism, and that an optimist believes tomorrow will be better than today and that they have a role to play in making it so. And I think if we can approach our information with that, it goes a long way. I'd also like to get your reaction. I think one of the things when people say, I need to stay informed, they take that to, I need to check the news every half hour, or I need to have alerts on my phone that are going to tell me when something happens. And the alert comes in and it's never good news. It's this person died and this thing blew up and there's a earthquake in Haiti and it's all this stuff. More often than not, we can't do much about that. And it just triggers everything. Do you have advice on how we can at least, sort of batch our news consumption?
Yeah,
And
yeah. So I say that there's two different types of the way you consume news, right? And it's just in time information or
yeah,
just in case information. Now, most people consume news in a just in case information, right? I need to know everything just in case I need to know something. And
right.
so I would say that's a waste of energy. It's a waste of mental energy. It's a waste of time. There are so many things that you can't necessarily do something about and are just going to make you feel bad. And it's not to say that you're ignorant for not knowing them, but our brains are not built to know as much and process as much as we have available to us. Just because we have more doesn't mean we need more, right? So that's just in case information. The other thing is just in time information. So when
Yep.
there is something that you care about, when there is something that you can do something about, when it's time to vote, for example, dive in, figure out who's saying what, where you want to place your vote. And it doesn't
Yeah.
necessarily have to just be mainstream news. There's loads of different places that you can go to find policies, manifestos, all the rest of it.
Yeah.
Expand your kind of information sources, but also maybe there's something coming up in your own line of work. Maybe there's something personally that you need to know more information about. Great, lean in, but be flexible. It's not like you have to watch the news every day at 10 or have to check my phone
Yeah.
every time there's an alert. You set up your own structure and move into a just in time information. And you'll find that it serves you so much better and you don't get overwhelmed with all of this other stuff that actually isn't relevant for what you're here for and who you can serve and how you can help and what activates you and what lights you up and what you do connect with. You don't need to care about everything to be an incredible person in this world and be able to do something magnificent for yourself and for other people. You just have to care about something, and one thing is enough.
Yeah.
One thing is enough. And so just in time information, give yourself permission to let some other stuff go, because it will make you more effective at the thing that you do actually engage with.
So good. And you don't have to care about everything and you don't have to have an opinion on everything, which is related but different. Again, Kevin Kelly says you don't have to attend every argument you're invited to. And I think we have this society now where something happens. It's like, I got to have a take. I got to get online. I got to yell at this person. I got to refute that. And it's like, you don't. And somehow that, again, that triggers that negativity and that bias that we have. And it's so destructive. It's helpful for us all to remember what Jodi says about our brains not being equipped to take in so much information about so much that's going on around the world. And with another great analogy, she describes that we need to balance positive and negative news much in the way that electricity happens only with positive and negative charges. And yes, she says we all need to stay informed, but there is a big difference between being informed by the news and indulging in it. And I was really struck by the research around the Boston Marathon bombing that concluded that people who wallowed in the coverage, and I was a little guilty here, often experience more post-traumatic stress than did many of the people who were there and experienced the tragedy in person. Now, back to my final segment of this Blue Sky conversation with Jodie Jackson. I think about my childhood and frankly, most of my adult life, the pattern was get up in the morning, read a paper or two, sometimes three, go to work, maybe check the news at night before you go to bed, TV news, some places had afternoon newspapers, and then you do it again the next day. There was no news consumption at 10 in the morning, there just wasn't, unless some huge thing happened or, alerts that are important, tornado warnings, for example. But it's that much harder. So I think your message of agency and you have a role to play in this is really important.
Yeah, I think that exercising the choice that you have and being humbly ignorant. One of the things that I say to my students when I was teaching, so I built a curriculum around news literacy for 16-year-olds. And the last session that we spoke about was biases. So we spoke about how our brains work. And the last bias that I spoke to the students about was the Dunning-Kruger bias. And this is the bias that says, because you know a little bit, you think you know a lot. And we overestimate our confidence in our knowledge, right? And when it comes to the news, I would like to consider it as an invitation to knowledge, not knowledge itself, right? Because you get a small snippet, as an article, for example, on something that, like you said, we're missing the history, we're missing the context, the nuance of this, or, of the significance of this event, and where it sits in its place in history and all of those other pieces. And so think about the news not as full fact, as if like now you know everything you need to know about that. Think of it like an invitation, like here's something. And if you want to go deeper on it, then do the work. But the news isn't the work. The news isn't the knowledge. It's the invitation to build the knowledge if you want to go deeper on it, sort of potentially somewhere else as well. And so what I always say to my students, because we do a lot of critical thinking as well.
Yeah.
And the way I sort of finish the entire the session together is be critical in your thinking, but be humble in your knowledge. Always be humble in your knowledge. Always know that you don't know.
Yeah.
And find liberation in that. We can get ourselves so stressed and tangled in knots to have to be right in a conversation or whatever they say, like, how can I come back to that? And it is so freeing when you give yourself permission to say things like, oh, I didn't know that. Oh, I hadn't heard that. And even allow them, if they are really wanting to vent their opinions about it, tell me more. Give them space. Yeah. And you'll find that you facilitate conversations with a lot more ease. You're less affected and you're liberated because you're not the one that needs to know. It's okay that you don't. It's okay. Right. And I quite enjoy it now when I say, oh, I didn't know that. And can you tell me more?
And I think I've talked about this before, but I think one of the things that can fuel an optimistic mindset is just that. I don't know everything. There's so much to learn and be curious about. That's a fundamental. If you think you know everything, then what's the point of going on and learning anything? So I'd like to talk some more about 16-year-olds. And I hadn't planned on this, but I'm finding it really interesting because, I'll speak about my upbringing. I grew up with this very sort of structured news environment. There were certain well-known newspapers, maybe your local paper, a couple, 2 or 3 shows in this country. Walter Cronkite was the news guy at night. So I get the sense that today's 16-year-olds, I don't even know what the structure is. And when they say, if you ask them, where do you get your news? I'd be very curious, how much of that is just Twitter links or so how is a 16-year-old approaching quote unquote the news these days?
So when I spoke to the 16-year-olds that I was teaching, it felt like a really irrelevant subject to them from the start because they didn't think that they watched the news. So the first kind of half of the session was helping them identify what news is. So we discussed like what news is, because it has changed. It's not legacy media where they might tune in and watch something on television or pick up a newspaper or even read it from the Independent or the Guardian, or BBC, or wherever it is that they get their news from. They get their news from social media, but it might not even be a news provider on social media.
Right.
Do you see what I mean? So we're talking about people talking about the news as well, or they might see firsthand events of people, like you said, tornadoes, for example, people actually being in the live situation, but there's no narrative around it. You're just seeing the event itself. So when I started speaking to the kids about the news, it was just, we all sort of worked together of what the news was. And really it's just information beyond their current experience that helps them understand the world beyond their own borders, the borders of their experience. So we sort of spoke about what the news is, where they access it. But yeah, it does look very different from, when we were younger.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And I assume too, as adults, we're modeling behavior. We always are for kids, whether they would admit it or not. They're seeing what we're doing. And it doesn't help when we're picking up our phone and gasping and banging our heads and being negative. And so we have a role to play too, I would think, in sort of fostering that. All of us, not just someone like you who's standing in front of a classroom of kids.
100%. And I do work with adults as well. So when I do the curriculum, so I've got a 10-year-old curriculum and a 16-year-old curriculum.
Okay.
And when I deliver them in schools, I'll also do a parent webinar with them. Because like media literacy, as much as you can teach about it in school, it happens most commonly and most infrequent and most informally, at home.
Sure.
Like you said, you're going to model the parents' behaviors, you're going to model your parents' beliefs to a certain extent until you build your own. So there is a huge influence that happens in the home. And so it's helping parents feel well resourced to be able to facilitate those conversations, to be able to think about their own behaviors. And not only that, something that I always say to parents is you can't give what you don't have, right? Yeah. If you have anxiety about the world and the state of the, of everything that is going on right now, if you have that level of anxiety and your kid comes to you and says, I'm really scared about this story that I heard, you're probably terrified too. Whereas if you've resourced yourself in a slightly different way. So, I do read a lot of solutions-focused news. I do have a broader perspective on, what the world is, what people are, and what my belief systems are about. Again, psychology, about the world, about other people, and about myself. I have a different structure that I've built by design. Mm-hmm. And so now when my kids come to me and they might have something to say, I can speak to them from a place of experience, and I'm not winging it. And I'm not worried about whether or not I'm doing the right thing, because this is how I'm aligned. And this is how I've got my own light that I can shine for them to be able to walk a path that might help them. And so even, how I speak to my kids about information overload or all of these other kind of things that come around it, I feel really, I feel confident in my ability to facilitate conversations and guide them in certain ways because I've done the work. And so my invitation to parents as well is kind of let me help you with some of these pieces so that you feel well resourced, so that you don't feel like you're winging it or you're out of your depth, so that you have the same kind of intuitive guidance that you can give to them on command, rather than having to go away, research something and then come back. It kind of lives within you as well.
Yeah, it reminds me of the example when you're on an airplane, they say, put the mask on yourself before helping.
100%.
Like, get your act together.
True.
Get yourself calm before your kid comes to you kind of triggered. And if you accelerate that, you're in big trouble. So you mentioned earlier, master your mind. Can you talk some more about that? And what is master your mind, and what are you hoping to accomplish, and how does that work?
So it's a 6-week, it's sort of a 6-week recorded training program. That helps, that uses the science of neuroconditioning, neuropsychology, to be able to help you train your brain and design what you feed your brain, as well as learn tools to be able to emotionally regulate so that your mind is working in alignment with you. So many of us fight against ourselves for so many things, whether it's our beliefs that we have that hold us back, whether it's our emotions that we have that get in our way at times, whether it's, circumstances that we find ourselves in. We all have things that we want to be able to kind of either get over or move through or move past. We don't always have the tools and the know-how of how to do that. And one of the things that I found, especially because of how powerful and how rapid media can be at transforming your beliefs and behaviors, it kind of gave me a fast track route to be able to say, well, how can we do this intentionally? How can we do this by design? And how can we stimulate this for ourselves? So what I teach is is activity based. It is ways that you can rewire your thinking so that your brain becomes something that is your biggest asset rather than your greatest liability. And that's something that so many people want but don't know how to create for themselves. And so, I mentioned some of the techniques is about repetition, about emotional intensity. You can stimulate those things, and it's incredible what can happen in your brain. Your brain is a sort of neuroplastic powerhouse. It is constantly rewiring itself. And you can use that knowledge to say, well, what do I want to rewire it to? How can I create something that really helps me? Because I have these goals, I have these ambitions, or maybe I don't yet, but I want them. I want clarity on what that would be. And this program really helps you understand yourself better and give you the tools to be able to activate yourself on command in a way that is going to serve you now and for the rest of your life.
It sounds amazing. How can someone listening today access this program?
So it's currently, there's a wait list on my website. So on Jodie Jackson.
I'm not surprised.
There's a wait list at the moment. I don't know if it's on my website actually, but if you go onto my LinkedIn or social media, there's a, like the link tree, there's a wait list that you can sign up for there. And then we'll be taking in another group of people from May. So if you did want to join the program, it'll be starting then. And there's either the pre-recorded version, which you can just go through at your own pace, or you can work more closely with me through it as well.
And they can readily get You Are What You Read. And I strongly encourage them to check out your TED Talk, which is where I first found you. It was terrific. And again, everything we're talking about is only getting more important, I believe, than less from when you first started this work. So I thank you for the work you're doing. You really have this figured out, I think. And it's about as important an issue, I think, in terms of our collective mental health, our democratic society, our well-being. And so I really thank you for your work and particularly for spending time spreading the message with us today.
Thank you. I really appreciate you having me on and giving me the platform. So thank you.
Thanks. Take care.
Take care.
Another key takeaway from Jodi is that the news is an invitation to knowledge, not knowledge itself. Even the most disciplined, thorough, and unbiased journalist can only provide part of a story. The invitation then for us is to dig more into the subject if it's one of interest and importance to us. And regarding the Master Your Mind course, when I last checked it out online, there were slots available. So you might want to check it out, as well as Jodi's book, You Are What You Read, which I highly recommend. I hope you enjoyed this Blue Sky conversation with Jodie Jackson. Before you go, please leave us a rating or review. And while you're at it, you might want to subscribe to Blue Sky wherever you get your podcasts. Sign up for the Blue Sky Weekend newsletter at theoptimisminstitute.com and follow us on social media. This and all Blue Sky episodes are made possible by the incredible editing and mixing done by the team at Sound On, Sound Off. You can learn more about their work at soundonsoundoff.com. All graphic design and cover art for Blue Sky and the Optimism Institute are provided by Crush Graphics. And that's Crush with a K if you'd like to check out more of their fantastic work at crushgraphics.com. Until next time, I'm the founder of the Optimism Institute and host of Blue Sky, Bill Burke, and I thank you for listening.